Welcome to the Open Licensing presentation. Open educational resources are course materials that are freely available and openly licensed so that faculty can do the 5 R's: revise, remix, reuse, redistribute, and retain. You can download the material, tailor it to your course, save a copy locally, and share it back out with attribution. Open educational resources help reduce textbook costs for students. In the OER Basics presentation, I only mentioned open licensing because there's so much to say about it. In this presentation, I'll get into the nuts and bolts of why open licensing is so important to the OER movement. When it comes to U.S. copyright law, intellectual property like textbooks usually falls into 2 broad categories. Either they're in the public domain or they're under copyright. So, for example, works that were published before 1923 are in the public domain and definitely don't require any permission to use. Works that are under copyright do require the copyright holder's permission before you can use them. And to keep things simple, when I talk about using a work, I'm talking about the things that instructors usually do, the 5 R's. But there's a big exception to the rule. Fair use and the Teach Act say that educational purposes are a good justification for using a work without the copyright holder's permission. So why do we need open licensing when we already have fair use? Educational fair use and the Teach Act can be difficult to interpret and, especially in the case of fair use, depend a great deal on the specifics of the use you plan to make of a work. What is fair in one context can be a copyright violation in another, especially if you plan to share your work widely. If you and your institution were to get caught up in a copyright lawsuit, it would be very expensive and time-consuming to defend yourself against the lawyers for Pearson or Harvard Business Review. Of course, you could always just ask the copyright holder for permission to use their work for your educational purpose. If they say yes, then you are covered. But it can be surprisingly hard to track down a copyright holder. When you do, you have to wait for their reply before you can proceed. This might take a while. What open licenses do is provide a shortcut for users. The creator of the work still holds the copyright, but the license they add specifies in advance what uses they give permission for you to do. So if you find something with an open license, you already know what you're allowed to do with it. So much easier. Coming at this from an author's perspective, if you create course materials and want to share them, you can publish them with an open license so that others will know that they're allowed to do the 5 R's on your work too. One caveat for faculty here: your contract may say that the work you create at work belongs to your institution and not to you. In that case, you will need to work with your administration to create a policy that enables you to add open licenses to your work if you want to. The most widely used open licenses are Creative Commons licenses. Their website has a tool that walks you through choosing the license that suits your need. There are 4 basic types of Creative Commons licenses, which can also be combined in certain ways. CC BY is the least restrictive license. It says that others can use your work as long as they provide attribution to you. CC BY non-commercial means that future users provide attribution to you and are not allowed to use your work for any commercial purpose. Many educators prefer this license because it ensures that a textbook publisher won't scoop up your openly licensed work and turn around and sell it to students. On the other hand, some people are concerned that a non-commercial license might prevent a campus bookstore from legitimately adding a small markup to a print version of an open textbook or course pack. CC BY Share Alike means that future users provide attribution to you and license their derivative work exactly the same way that you did. Last, CC BY No Derivatives is the only type of open license that I really wouldn't recommend for educational purposes. No derivatives means that your work can't be changed at all, so you can't do the 5 R's with them. CC BY ND licensed materials don't actually meet the definition of open educational resources. As I mentioned, Creative Commons licenses are the ones that you usually see, but there are all kinds of copyright and licensing language out there. If you run across content that you want to use, but you're not quite sure about the permissions, you can still always contact the copyright holder. While you're at it, you can ask them to add a Creative Commons license to their work so that future users will be clear on what they're allowed to do without waiting for a reply. Open Washington has a great open attribution builder, which I've used to create the attributions at the bottom of my slides for these presentations. You put in the citation and license info, and it writes you a nice attribution that you can copy and paste. There are certain kinds of work that are almost always under regular copyright without open licenses. For example, if you're studying modern poetry, your primary sources are all under copyright. And in these kinds of cases, you might be able to work with your library to get access to the work for your students. The presentation on library resources as course materials covers how this works. Copyright is a complex topic, so if you still have questions, it's a good idea to check with a librarian or copyright officer at your institution. You can also connect with colleagues and ask questions on the Open Oregon listserv. Thank you for listening.